The second lesson plan could be based on the Bloom's revised taxonomy, the BRT model lesson plan. In this again, we will take a poem, a psalm of life. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow finds us further than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing, leave behind us footprints on the sand of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing over life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing, shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. The learning objectives in a BRT lesson model could be that the learners would be able to 1. Understand the gist of the poem, 2. Identify the poetic devices used in the poem, 3. Summarize the poem, and finally, evaluate the message conveyed by the poem and relate its message to their own lives. The teaching aids used here could also include newspaper and magazine cuttings, overhead projector if it is available, and so on. The method of teaching in this case could be the flipped classroom, brainstorming, discussion, and quizzing. The procedures involved could be the focus of the lesson plan. The procedure is the foundation of a lesson plan. It tells the ways in which we can activate the schema of learners and teach or share information with learners. Begin with some thought-provoking questions. You're a fast runner. If you lose an inter-school race competition, how will you feel? What will you do next? At this stage, try to, on day 1, tap learners' background knowledge. We can share a self-experience or can ask learners to share any such story to the class in which one tells a story from failure to success. We could generate curiosity among the learners, show newspaper cuttings of a recent earthquake that took place somewhere, like in Turkey, elicit from learners what they feel about the situation. We can show pictures of the rehabilitation of people post the calamity. Tell motivational stories of how people continue to live but live with an aim to do good, and narrate stories of post-COVID survivors. We could engage the learners in a group activity. After generating curiosity and motivation in class, we can ask to divide the class into groups of 5, and then we can ask the learners to come up with such stories in the next class. We could instruct them that their story should have a moral and should not exceed 200 words. The next day, they will listen to the stories of all the groups and provide a moral for each story. So, on day 2, repetition and recap of the previous day should occur. In this class, we could make the group leaders of all the groups narrate their stories. We could ask groups to listen to the stories carefully and provide the moral of the stories being narrated by their peers. At this point, introduce the poem Psalm of Life and describe the setting in which the poem was written. Describe every stanza with relevant examples. We can explain the poem by referring to the stories told earlier by the learners. We may also pose questions like the following ones during the reading of the poem. Choose one correct statement from the following. A. The Psalm of Life is a poem of optimism. B. The Psalm of Life is a poem of evil. C. The Psalm of Life is a poem of hatred. D. The Psalm of Life is a poem of pessimism. The second question could be choose the correct statement among the following. A. The Psalm of Life wants us to believe in spirits. The Psalm of Life wants us to pray to God and do nothing. C. The Psalm of Life wants us to believe in magic. D. The Psalm of Life wants us to work hard and have self-belief. Another question could be, the third one, identify the speaker of the poem. A. A young man. B. The narrator. C. A sailor. D. God. Fourth, what is the lesson learned from the poem? A. Act as heroes amidst difficulties. B. People's goal in life is to be happy before dying. C. Wait for the perfect time. D. To be happy should be the motto of life. Fifth question. What does the word bivouac mean in the poem? A. A tent. B. A permanent place to live. C. A temporary camp used by soldiers. D. A shelter. Note that these questions are pitched at different cognitive and knowledge levels of the BRT. They tend to exploit learners' factual, conceptual, and procedural knowledge at different cognitive levels. Moreover, the questions are worded according to the verbs table to align with each level of the BRT model. Draw learners' attention to the poetic devices in the poem. A very common example to teach alliteration is Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Paradox is another device. Write a few examples of paradox on the board, such as in every sorrow there is happiness. Less is more. The only constant is change. Elicit from the learners what they observe in the sentences and explain the device that when two contradictory elements are placed together, it is called a paradoxical statement. Ask learners to find such statements from the poem. The next device is anaphora, the prevalence of the same expression several times in the poem is called anaphora. Examples: stay home, stay well, stay safe, stay secure, or run fast, run far, run further. After explaining all the devices, we may ask learners to do a group assignment. This will be a post-reading activity. They can do this activity at home. Give them a worksheet as shown below. Learners will fill the table and discuss in the class. We could have a table with the first column using poetic device, the second column having examples from the poem, the third column having examples from other sources, and the fourth column having the reason for the device to be used. For example, alliteration as a poetic device could have an example from the poem, not enjoyment and not sorrow. Examples from other sources could be the kangaroo kicked the kind kid. The reason for the device to be used is to emphasize, or a poetic device like anaphora. Examples from the poem could be repetition of life. Examples from other sources could be break, break, break. The reason for the device to be used is to highlight emotions. In order to gauge the understanding, applying, analyzing, and evaluating the poem, we may also ask some open-ended questions like the ones given below. 1. Do the themes of optimism and action in the Psalm of Life seem idealistic given the reality of the world filled with violence, pessimism, and hopelessness? Determine your own action plan of making this world a better place to live for self and others in the background of the poem. There could be other questions like these. The table below gives a detailed description of the activities done in class according to the BRT model. In the BRT model, one of the elements that could be there is comprehension. There could be multiple choice questions there. Vocabulary. The fifth multiple choice question that we dealt with was focused on vocabulary. Another could be writing as a focus area. Story writing in the pre-reading stage that we had employed, and the poetic devices table in the C1 stage that we employed could deal with this. Speaking skills are focused upon where the learners provided the moral of the stories at the pre-reading stage. Thinking is activated at various levels and they would work on the procedural level to predict, compose, and conclude. Listening was also focused upon in this lesson plan by asking the story to be narrated by the teacher at the pre-reading stage, and then the questions that were asked at the stage that were pitched at the conceptual level. Thus, BRT can be appropriately and effectively used in a language classroom. It is a very important tool that teachers can use to create an effective and instructive methodology for different age groups of learners. It can be useful to plan, design, and execute different kinds of curricula depending on the proficiency levels of learners.